Mr. Alistair Finch was about to crucify a scholarship kid with a quantum mechanics problem he couldn't possibly solve. What he didn't know was that he was about to be ripped apart by a truth he refused to see. What happens when a teacher's corrosive prejudice slams into a mind that operates on a different plane of existence? And what devastating secret was this quiet transfer student hiding that would soon leave an entire institution on its knees? This is the story of Liam O'Connell, a 17-year-old who walked the hallowed halls of an elite academy with second-hand shoes and a first-rate mind. While his classmates were coasting on legacy and generational wealth, he was wrestling with the very fabric of the universe by the faint glow of a cracked smartphone screen. While they saw him as an outsider, a charity case who didn't belong, he was preparing to prove them all catastrophically wrong. But this isn't just a tale of one brilliant kid. It speaks of a racist system designed to destroy the very potential it claims to nurture. It's about the soul-shaking moment when raw, undeniable genius becomes louder than the deafening roar of bias. Where are you listening from tonight? Drop it in the comments and hit that subscribe button, because this story is a goddamn reckoning. Mr. Finch had no idea what kind of hell he was about to unleash. The autumn sun, weak and indifferent, bled through the Gothic windows of Northwood Preparatory Academy's science wing. It cast long, skeletal shadows across oak floors that had been polished by the footsteps of senators, CEOs, and Nobel laureates for over a century. This wasn't just a school. It was a dynasty factory, a place where the children of the elite were forged into the next generation of masters of the universe. AP Physics here wasn't a class. It was an inheritance. Mr. Alistair Finch had presided over this specific kingdom for 28 years. His classroom was a shrine to his own perceived greatness, the walls plastered with accolades, teaching awards, and framed photographs of his star pupils who had gone on to conquer MIT, Stanford, and Caltech. He saw himself not as a teacher, but as a gatekeeper, a stern guardian of impossibly high standards. But this year, a foreign element had contaminated his pristine ecosystem. Liam O'Connell sat in the back of the room, a ghost in a machine of privilege. He'd been there for 4 months, ever since a scholarship had plucked him from the gritty reality of a forgotten public school in the city's industrial sector. While other students pulled up in brand-new BMWs and Teslas, Liam endured a 90-minute commute on 2 city buses, leaving his cramped apartment before the sun even thought about rising. His backpack was frayed at the seams, its zippers held together with paper clips. His notebooks were filled with equations so complex they looked like a secret code, written on paper so thin you could almost see through it. The scholarship letter in his file spoke of unprecedented aptitude. Mr. Finch, however, had his own term for it: a fluke. He'd seen these charity cases before. They arrived with wide eyes and big dreams, but they were almost always devoured by the relentless pace and crushing expectations of Northwood. They were fish out of water, gasping for air in an atmosphere too rarefied for their common lungs. They never lasted in his advanced placement courses. What Mr. Finch couldn't possibly comprehend was Liam's secret life. Every night, after his shift washing dishes at a greasy diner downtown, after his mother, a home health aide, had finally collapsed into an exhausted sleep, Liam would set up his sanctuary on their small, wobbly kitchen table. Under the flickering fluorescent light, he'd power on a third-hand laptop he'd spent an entire summer saving for. From midnight until 3 or 4 in the morning, while the city slept, Liam O'Connell traveled to other universes. He dove headfirst into the open courseware archives of the world's greatest universities. He didn't just study, he devoured. He taught himself tensor calculus to understand general relativity. He grappled with the Schrödinger equation until the sun came up. He filled notebooks with solutions to quantum field theory problems that most students wouldn't encounter until deep into their doctoral studies. But at Northwood, he was silent. He learned quickly that in a world powered by arrogance and pedigree, being underestimated was a shield. Being invisible was a form of armor. Mr. Finch, a man who judged a book by its worn, faded cover, saw this silence not as a strategy, but as a symptom. He saw a student who never raised his hand, who ate lunch alone, who wore the same 2 pairs of jeans on rotation. He saw the scuffed shoes and the tired eyes, and drew a simple, damning conclusion. Scholarship students, he'd once pontificated to a colleague in the faculty lounge, they have the ambition, I suppose, but rarely the foundation. It's like trying to run a marathon without ever learning to walk. The irony was a quiet tragedy. While Mr. Finch condescendingly reviewed basic Newtonian mechanics, Liam was mentally deriving the equations for quantum tunneling. While Mr. Finch questioned if Liam was keeping up, Liam was secretly 4 textbooks ahead, exploring concepts the school's curriculum wouldn't touch for years, if ever. His mother knew about the late nights, but not the true extent of his solitary obsession. She'd find him passed out at the kitchen table, his cheek pressed against a page of incomprehensible symbols, a cold cup of coffee by his side. She'd gently drape a blanket over his shoulders and whisper a prayer for the boy who carried the weight of her dreams. "He's got a fire in him," she'd tell her sister over the phone. "I don't know what he's doing with all those crazy numbers and letters, but I know it's going to take him somewhere far away from here." She was right. But the world Liam had entered wasn't built to see his kind of fire. It was designed to extinguish it. Mr. Finch had a particularly cruel method he called Socratic pressure testing. When he decided a student was a weak link, he would isolate them, put them on the spot with a problem he knew was beyond their grasp. It was, he claimed, a way to diagnose deficiencies. In reality, it was a public execution, a way to confirm his own biases and reinforce the established pecking order. Liam had become his favorite specimen for these brutal experiments. "Mr. O'Connell, let's see if you've done the reading," he'd sneer, calling him to the board to solve a problem that was a subtle, sadistic twist on the homework. He expected Liam to stammer, to freeze, to fail. He wanted the confirmation that this kid from the wrong side of the tracks was, in fact, out of his depth. But Liam never failed. He would approach the board, solve the problem with a quiet, unnerving efficiency, and return to his seat without a word. This didn't impress Mr. Finch. It infuriated him. It felt like defiance. Today would be the final test. Today, he had prepared the academic equivalent of a nuclear weapon, a problem so esoteric, so monstrously complex, that failure wasn't just an option. It was a certainty, a public, soul-crushing, humiliating certainty. What Mr. Finch didn't know was that he wasn't just about to test a student. He was about to pull the pin on a grenade that would blow his entire world apart. Mr. Finch slammed his textbook shut. The sound cracked through the classroom like a gunshot, and the students, conditioned like Pavlov's dogs, fell into a tense, expectant silence. It was the quiet that always preceded a public sacrifice. "Class, we have spent the last week discussing the foundational principles of quantum mechanics," he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "Now it's time to separate the theorists from the tourists." 24 pairs of eyes followed him as he stalked to his desk and retrieved a single sheet of paper from a locked drawer. It was a problem he had photocopied from a Cambridge University graduate physics journal, one a friend on the faculty there had sent him as an intellectual curiosity. It was beautiful in its lethality. "Liam," he said, the name sliding off his tongue like venom. "Given your silent contemplation of late, perhaps you'd be so kind as to lead our discussion today." It wasn't a request. It was a death sentence. Liam could feel the collective gaze of the room land on him like a physical weight. In the front row, Ashley Vanderbilt, whose father sat on the school's board of trustees, turned around and smirked. Chad Worthington III, a legacy student whose greatest academic achievement was showing up, whispered something to his friend, and they both snickered. Liam felt his face flush, the familiar heat of humiliation rising in his neck. "Just a small thought experiment I've devised," Mr. Finch continued, his lips curling into a smug smile as he saw the discomfort radiating from the boy in the back row. "Nothing too strenuous for a mind truly engaged with the material." He taped the paper to the center of the massive whiteboard, a white flag of surrender waiting to be waved. "You'll have the remainder of the period," he declared, "and since the purpose of this exercise is to illuminate the complexities for your peers, I expect a full, step-by-step vocal explanation of your thought process. Show us how a real physicist thinks." The problem stared out at Liam as he walked the long, green mile to the front of the classroom. The air was thick with the predatory glee of teenagers sensing a kill. Mr. Finch had orchestrated this perfectly. It was the last period on a Friday. Liam's failure would be the talk of the weekend, spreading through the gilded social circles of Northwood, a cautionary tale confirming the unspoken rule. The scholarship kids were just for show. "The floor is yours," Mr. Finch said, reclining in his chair like a Roman emperor about to watch two gladiators fight to the death. Liam picked up the dry erase marker, his hand slick with sweat. He looked at the paper, and the world stopped. His heart didn't pound with fear. It throbbed with a sudden, shocking jolt of recognition. It wasn't just a graduate-level problem. It was a highly specific problem dealing with quantum entanglement and non-local variables, requiring an elegant application of Bell's theorem. It was the kind of problem that would appear in a final exam for a PhD candidacy course. More than that, it was almost a perfect mirror of a problem he had spent 3 consecutive nights, from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m., wrestling with on an open-source forum for theoretical physicists. He had not only solved it, he had, in his own solitary way, mastered it, finding a more elegant and direct solution than the one proposed in the official university solution key. Mr. Finch, in his arrogant attempt to find an impossible problem, had unknowingly handed Liam the keys to the kingdom. For a split second, Liam considered throwing the fight. He could scribble a few meaningless equations, shrug his shoulders, and accept the humiliation. It would be easier, safer. But as he stood there, marker in hand, something inside him finally snapped. It was a cold, quiet rage, a fury at being perpetually misjudged, at being a pawn in a rich man's game, at having his passion and his discipline mistaken for inadequacy. He uncapped the marker. "This problem addresses a paradox in quantum entanglement," he said. His voice, though quiet, was perfectly clear, cutting through the silence with surgical precision. "To solve it, we need to establish a framework using Bell's theorem to test for the presence of hidden local variables." Mr. Finch's smug expression wavered, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. This wasn't the stammering insecurity he had anticipated. Liam began to write, his hand moving with a fluid certainty. The equations flowed onto the board, not as memorized symbols, but as the logical syntax of a language he understood better than English. "First," he explained, "we define the spin states of the 2 entangled particles, particle A and particle B, along 3 arbitrary axes." His explanation was not just accurate, it was insightful. He wasn't just regurgitating steps, he was teaching, deconstructing a monumentally complex concept with a clarity that Mr. Finch himself could not have mustered. The energy in the room began to shift. The whispers stopped. The smirks faded. Students who had been scrolling through their phones were now sitting up, their eyes glued to the whiteboard, captivated by the intellectual symphony unfolding before them. Even Chad Worthington III looked confused, as if he were trying to translate a foreign language. Now, we calculate the quantum mechanical prediction for the correlation of the spin measurements, Liam continued, his voice gaining strength, his confidence building with every perfectly rendered equation. This is where we see the departure from classical intuition. Mr. Finch's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of stony disbelief. He watched, his mind reeling, as his impossible problem was systematically and elegantly dismembered. 10 minutes in, Liam was not just solving the problem, he was dancing with it. His work was a masterpiece of logical deduction, a demonstration of mathematical physics that belonged in a seminar at Caltech, not in this glorified country club. And so, Liam said, stepping back from the board and placing the final piece of the puzzle, we can conclude that the correlation coefficient violates Bell's inequality, thus proving that no theory of local hidden variables can reproduce all the predictions of quantum mechanics. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the room. Mr. Finch stared at the board, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. This was impossible. No high school student, no matter how bright, should be able to do this. Not without a tutor, not without a university professor guiding them. But instead of conceding defeat, instead of acknowledging the miracle he had just witnessed, Mr. Finch stood up, and with a voice trembling with a toxic mixture of shock and rage, he made an accusation that would ignite a firestorm. The silence in the room stretched for a full 20 seconds, a vacuum of disbelief. It was long enough for Mr. Finch's shock to ferment into a dark, ugly suspicion. It was long enough for every student in the class to realize they had just seen something extraordinary. And it was long enough for Liam to understand that his moment of triumph was about to become an indictment. "Where?" Mr. Finch began, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Did you see that before?" He didn't look at the board. He looked at Liam, his eyes narrowed into accusatory slits. The question wasn't one of curiosity. It was an interrogation. "That's quite an impressive display, Liam," he said, but the words were coated in acid. There was no praise in his tone, only the sharp, jagged edge of incredulity. Ashley Vanderbilt, ever the teacher's pet, raised her hand. "Mr. Finch, I've never even heard of Bell's theorem. Was that in the supplementary reading?" "No, Ashley, it most certainly was not," Mr. Finch snapped, his gaze still locked on Liam. "That's because Bell's theorem and its applications are concepts reserved for graduate-level physics. They are not part of any high school curriculum on this planet." He walked slowly toward the board, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. He ran a finger under the elegant chain of logic Liam had constructed, as if searching for a flaw, a crack in the facade. "So I'll ask you again, Liam," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Where did you learn this?" The trap was set. Liam felt it closing in, its steel jaws ready to snap shut. How could he explain the hundreds of solitary hours, the fanatical devotion, the relentless, all-consuming hunger for knowledge that was the only thing that made his life bearable? How could he articulate that his mind lived in a place that Northwood's manicured curriculum could never touch? I study on my own," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "On your own?" Mr. Finch let out a short, derisive laugh. "You studied graduate-level quantum theory, on your own, in your spare time?" The skepticism was a physical force, pressing down on Liam, suffocating him. Around the room, the awe that had filled the students' faces only moments before was being replaced by suspicion. Chad Worthington smirked again, sensing the tide turning back in his favor. "Maybe he got some help from the internet," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's enough, Chad," Mr. Finch said, but there was no force behind it. Chad had just given voice to his own theory. Liam's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I didn't get help. I worked through the open courseware from MIT and Caltech. I participate in online forums. I have notebooks full of my work. I can show you. MIT OpenCourseWare. Mr. Finch repeated the words as if they were a punchline. And you just so happened to have practiced the exact esoteric problem that I selected from a Cambridge journal for today? The implication was a sledgehammer, and it landed with brutal force. He cheated. The unspoken accusation filled the air. A student in the back, a quiet girl named Maya, spoke up. But Mr. Finch, are you saying he cheated? How could he? You just put the problem up. I am saying, Mr. Finch replied, choosing his words with deliberate, poisonous care, that this level of mastery doesn't just appear out of thin air. A performance this polished, this perfect, it suggests prior knowledge, rehearsal. The injustice of it was a physical pain. They were using his own brilliance, the very thing he had worked so hard to build in secret, as evidence against him. His perfection was now proof of his fraud. But even if he had seen it before, Maya pressed, her brow furrowed in confusion, he'd still have to understand it on a really deep level to explain it like that, right? Mr. Finch's jaw tightened. The girl's simple logic was threatening the narrative he was weaving. Understanding and memorization are two very different things, Maya. One can be taught to parrot the steps of a solution without any genuine comprehension of the underlying physics. Something inside Liam broke. The quiet anger that had been simmering for months finally boiled over. "Give me another one," he said. The words were quiet, but they resonated with the force of a thunderclap. The challenge caught Mr. Finch off guard. It was a gamble that could backfire on him spectacularly. What if the boy could do it again? "That won't be necessary," he said, a little too quickly. "What is necessary is to uphold the academic integrity of this institution." Chad Worthington couldn't resist twisting the knife. "Dude, just admit it. You got lucky or something? That was way out of your league." "And what exactly is my league, Chad?" Liam's voice was dangerously calm. The direct question made Chad flinch. It made the entire room uncomfortable because everyone knew the ugly, unspoken answer. Mr. Finch intervened, seizing the opportunity to re-establish his authority. "Your league, Mr. O'Connell, is determined by your documented performance in this class, not by a single inexplicable anomaly." He strode to his desk and pulled out a disciplinary referral slip, the dark red paper a symbol of institutional condemnation. "I am referring you to Headmistress Wallace's office," he announced to the stunned class. "Academic dishonesty is the most serious offense a student at Northwood can commit." The words echoed in the silent room. Several students gasped. Maya looked horrified. Even Chad seemed shocked at the sudden, severe escalation. Liam stared at the red slip as Mr. Finch filled it out, his sharp, angry script sealing Liam's fate. Every letter he wrote felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of his future. "Mr. Finch," he pleaded, a wave of desperation washing over him. "I can prove it. I can show you everything." "The only thing you'll be showing," Mr. Finch interrupted, thrusting the referral form into Liam's hand, "is yourself to the headmistress's office, now." As Liam picked up his worn backpack, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and fear, Mr. Finch addressed the rest of the class. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. There are no shortcuts to true understanding. Deception will always be brought into the light." But as Liam walked down the long, empty corridor, the sound of his footsteps mocking him on the polished oak floors, he was unaware of two crucial facts. First, that someone else had been in the room, a silent observer in the back corner. And second, that this person wasn't just anybody. He was a man who held the power to shatter Mr. Finch's world with a single sentence. The office of Headmistress Evelyn Wallace smelled of old money, lemon polish, and quiet authority. Diplomas from Vassar and Yale hung on the paneled walls, flanking tastefully framed photos of her with governors and titans of industry. This was the sanctum sanctorum of Northwood, the place where fortunes were made and futures were broken. Liam sat in a stiff, leather-backed chair, the red referral slip lying on the massive mahogany desk between them like a bloody confession. "So," Headmistress Wallace began, peering at him over a pair of designer reading glasses. "Mr. Finch seems to believe you engaged in a serious act of academic dishonesty today." Her voice was smooth and controlled, the voice of a woman accustomed to managing crises with minimal fuss. The whole situation felt like a nightmare. Less than an hour ago, he had felt the exhilarating thrill of pure intellectual victory. Now, he was fighting for his academic life, for the scholarship that was his only ticket out, for the future his mother had sacrificed everything for. "I didn't cheat," he said, his voice hoarse. I knew the material." "And that's the crux of the issue, isn't it, Liam?" she said, leaning forward. Her expression wasn't overtly hostile, but it was laden with a deep, institutional skepticism. "According to Mr. Finch, the problem you solved is based on concepts that are years beyond the scope of our curriculum. Concepts, I might add, that would require dedicated university-level study." She slid a folder across the desk. It was his file, his grades from his old school, mostly B's, a few A's in science, painted a portrait of a capable, but not extraordinary, student. "Your academic history, while respectable, doesn't suggest this sudden leap into the highest echelons of theoretical physics. Surely you can appreciate Mr. Finch's confusion." The walls were closing in. The system was designed to reject data that didn't fit its preconceived models. His B average at a school that could barely afford chalk was being weighed against a moment of genius, and the B average was winning. "My old school didn't have the classes," he tried to explain. "They didn't have the resources. I had to teach myself. I spent all my free time studying online. I have the notes. I have the problem sets I've completed. It's all on my laptop." "Mr. Finch mentioned your claim of using online resources," she said, her tone gentle but dismissive. "But Liam, the specific problem Mr. Finch chose was from an obscure academic journal. The statistical probability of you randomly stumbling upon that exact problem in your self-study is, you must admit, infinitesimally small." The logic was a perfect, inescapable prison. His brilliance was so profound, so unlikely, that it had circled all the way back around to become proof of his guilt. Just then, a soft knock echoed on the heavy oak door. The headmistress's assistant poked her head in, her face etched with a mixture of confusion and anxiety. "I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, Headmistress, but Dr. Eris Thorne is here. He says it's a matter of extreme urgency regarding a student in Mr. Finch's class." Headmistress Wallace looked baffled. "Dr. Thorne, from Caltech? What on earth?" The door swung open further, and a man in his late 40s entered. He had the sharp, intelligent eyes of a man who spent his days staring into the heart of the universe, and he carried an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. Trailing behind him was Mr. Finch, his face pale, a look of dawning horror on his features. "Headmistress Wallace," Dr. Thorne said, his voice calm and resonant. "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Eris Thorne. I believe a grave error is about to be made concerning one of your students." Mr. Finch rushed forward. "Evelyn, I can explain. Dr. Thorne was here today as part of the university outreach program. He was observing my class." Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. A witness. There had been a witness, and not just any witness. "Dr. Thorne," Headmistress Wallace said, her professional composure fully engaged. "What is it you believe you observed?" Dr. Thorne's gaze fell on Liam, and for the first time that day, Liam saw something other than suspicion or pity. He saw recognition. He saw understanding. I observed a young man display a level of intuitive grasp of quantum mechanics that I have seen in only a handful of my own doctoral candidates at Caltech, Dr. Thorne stated, his words clear and unambiguous. Mr. Finch's face flushed a deep, mottled red. Dr. Thorne, with all due respect, the circumstances were irregular. The problem was designed to be impossible? Dr. Thorne finished for him. Yes, I gathered as much, which is precisely what makes what I witnessed so profoundly remarkable. He turned his attention back to the headmistress. The problem Mr. Finch presented is a classic test of a student's understanding of Bell's theorem. To solve it, one needs more than memorized formulas. One needs a deep, conceptual fluency in the subject. But that's the entire point, Mr. Finch protested, his voice cracking. How could he possibly possess that fluency without a prep school pedigree, without private tutors? Dr. Thorne's interruption was quiet, but it carried the devastating force of a wrecking ball. Mr. Finch, some of the most brilliant minds in the history of physics, Faraday, Ramanujan, were autodidacts. They were driven by a relentless curiosity that transcended their formal circumstances. Headmistress Wallace looked from the irate teacher to the world-renowned physicist, the complex political calculus of the situation playing out across her face. Dr. Thorne, she said cautiously, are you asserting that Liam's performance was legitimate? I am not asserting it, Dr. Thorne replied, his voice firm. I am stating it as an expert witness. What I saw was not cheating. It was not memorization. It was genius. But even with the backing of a Caltech professor, the gears of the institution continued to grind. Mr. Finch, fighting for his professional pride, rallied for one last stand. Even so, he insisted, the polished nature of the presentation, the sheer coincidence of the problem, it remains deeply suspicious. It suggests a level of preparation that cannot be explained by mere coincidence. The cloud of doubt still lingered. The system was built to trust its own, and Liam was not one of its own. Headmistress Wallace let out a long, weary sigh. Dr. Thorne, your professional opinion carries immense weight. However, Mr. Finch has raised a legitimate concern regarding academic protocol. We have procedures we are obligated to follow. She turned her gaze to Liam, her expression a mixture of apology and institutional resolve. I'm afraid I have no choice but to suspend you, pending a full investigation by the academic board. The word suspend was a physical blow. It meant he was out. It meant his scholarship was gone. It meant facing his mother with the news that he had failed, that her dream for him had died here, in this office. The shame was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. But as Liam stood up, his body numb, his dreams turning to ash, Dr. Thorne's voice cut through the despair. Headmistress, he said, his tone quiet but unyielding. Before you ruin this young man's life based on one teacher's unsubstantiated suspicions, I propose an alternative. Let him prove it. Dr. Thorne's suggestion fell into the tense silence of the office like a spark on a dry fuse. Headmistress Wallace froze, her hand hovering over the suspension form. Mr. Finch's expression twisted from vindicated righteousness to outright alarm. Prove it? Headmistress Wallace repeated, the words hanging in the air. Precisely, Dr. Thorne affirmed. He stepped forward, his presence commanding the space between them. If this is truly a question of Mr. O'Connell's ability, then let's remove all doubt. Let's answer the question with the rigor it deserves. I propose a formal, controlled assessment. Mr. Finch's voice was sharp with panic. Dr. Thorne, this is highly unorthodox. We have our own internal procedures for— Your internal procedures, Doctor. Thorne interrupted, his voice smooth as silk but with an edge of tempered steel. are on the verge of cannibalizing one of the most brilliant young minds I have ever encountered, based on nothing more than circumstantial suspicion and ingrained bias. As a scientist and an educator, I find that outcome to be unacceptable." He turned his full attention to Headmistress Wallace. "I am willing, here and now, to design and personally proctor a comprehensive physics assessment, 3 problems, covering distinct areas of advanced theory, witnessed by all parties, no prior notice, no possibility of outside assistance. If Liam performs as I anticipate, the matter will be settled." Liam felt his own pulse thundering in his ears. It was a terrifying, exhilarating proposition. It was a chance at redemption, but it was also a stage for a far more public and damning failure. Headmistress Wallace was caught in a crossfire. On one side was her veteran department head, a man with tenure and deep roots in the Northwood community. On the other was a titan from Caltech, a man who represented the pinnacle of academic prestige that Northwood desperately craved. "What would this assessment entail, exactly?" she asked, her voice cautious. Dr. Thorne didn't hesitate. "I will select 3 problems, 1 from special relativity, 1 from quantum electrodynamics, and 1 from matrix mechanics. Each will be impossible to solve through rote memorization. They will require genuine, fluid, analytical thinking." He looked from the headmistress to Mr. Finch. "I will personally witness the entire examination. You and any other official you deem necessary may also be present." "And if he can't do it?" Mr. Finch challenged, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Then your suspicions will be validated, and you may proceed as you see fit," Dr. Thorne answered calmly. "But if he succeeds, and I am staking my professional reputation on the prediction that he will, then this young man is owed more than a reinstatement. He is owed a profound apology, and the kind of academic support that matches his extraordinary gifts." The stakes had just been raised to an astronomical level. This was no longer about a single red referral slip. It was a trial by fire, a battle for the soul of the institution itself. Mr. Finch's face was a mask of desperation. "Evelyn, this is a circus. We cannot allow our established protocols to be dictated by an outside observer. We also have an established protocol to identify and nurture exceptional talent, Alistair," Headmistress Wallace shot back, her decision finally taking shape. The institutional calculus had resolved in favor of prestige over prejudice. "Dr. Thorne, your proposal is accepted, on one condition." She turned to Liam, her gaze intense. "Mr. O'Connell, do you consent to this assessment, knowing full well that the outcome will be binding and will determine your entire future at this academy?" Liam's throat was dry as desert sand, but his voice emerged, clear and steady. "Yes, I agree." "Very well," the headmistress said, glancing at the clock on the wall. "It is now 3:30 p.m. Can this be arranged today?" "Absolutely," Dr. Thorne confirmed. "I require 30 minutes to formulate the problems and secure the necessary space. We will convene at 4 p.m. in the Science Wing's seminar room." As the adults began to make the arrangements, Liam felt the immense pressure of his mother's sacrifices, her double shifts, her unwavering faith in him, all converging on this single, terrifying point in time. It all came down to this. As Mr. Finch and the headmistress left to prepare, Dr. Thorne approached him. "Liam," he said, his voice low and serious, "listen to me. What I saw in that classroom today was not a fluke. It was not a party trick. It was the mark of a true physicist. Do not let them make you doubt that." The words were a lifeline. For the first time, an authority figure wasn't questioning him. He was validating him. "But what if I choke?" Liam whispered, the fear a cold knot in his stomach. "What if I can't do it under pressure?" "Then you will do what real scientists do," Dr. Thorne said firmly. "You will struggle. You will think. You will persist. The path to a solution is rarely a straight line. Mr. Finch, who had lingered in the doorway, overheard the exchange. "Dr. Thorne, I trust you are not giving the student an unfair advantage by coaching him." "I am reminding him, Mr. Finch," Dr. Thorne replied, his voice laced with ice, "that genuine ability is not so fragile that it can be broken by manufactured doubt." The animosity between the two men was thick enough to cut with a knife. This had become personal. "So be it," Headmistress Wallace declared, re-entering the office. 4 p.m. The seminar room. Dr. Thorne will provide the challenges. Mr. Finch and I will bear witness. She looked directly at Liam, her expression unreadable. "Young man, the next 30 minutes may be the most important of your life. I suggest you use them well." As Liam left the office, Dr. Thorne fell into step beside him. "There's something else you need to know," he said quietly. "My visit here today wasn't random. I've been monitoring the engagement metrics on Caltech's public physics forums for the past year. There's an anonymous user from this geographic area whose insights, questions, and original problem solutions have been nothing short of breathtaking. They show a postgraduate level comprehension. I came to this school today on the slim chance I might identify that user." He stopped and looked at Liam. "That user is you, isn't it?" Liam could only nod, stunned into silence. The revelation was seismic. This wasn't a defense anymore. This was a confirmation. His secret life, his solitary midnight studies, had not gone unnoticed. Someone had seen the fire. But now he had to walk into a sterile room and prove to the world that the fire was real, or watch it be extinguished for good. The seminar room in the science wing felt less like a classroom and more like an operating theater. At precisely 4 p.m., the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, unforgiving glare on the large conference table. In the center, placed with geometric precision, were 3 sealed manila envelopes. Each contained a universe of complex physics. Each held the power to decide a future. Dr. Thorne had used his 30 minutes to construct what he called an undeniable diagnostic. 3 distinct problems, each from a different pillar of modern physics, designed not just to test knowledge, but to X-ray the very structure of a person's mind. Headmistress Wallace entered first, her face a neutral mask of professional composure. Finch followed closely behind. His earlier panic now hardened into a tense, rigid posture of defiance. He was a man hoping to witness a collapse. Assistant Headmaster Peterson, a bland bureaucratic man, had been summoned as a third, impartial observer. Liam was already there, sitting at one end of the table. The frantic anxiety of the past hour had subsided, replaced by a strange, crystalline calm. The waiting had sharpened his resolve. This was no longer just about defending his honor. It was about defending the very idea that brilliance could bloom in the most unexpected soil. "Before we commence," Dr. Thorne announced, his voice commanding the room, "let us be clear on the protocol. Liam will have 90 minutes to address all 3 problems. He will work in complete silence, with no resources other than the provided paper and a pen. He must show every step of his work and provide a written explanation of his methodology for each solution." He made eye contact with each person in the room. "If he successfully solves all 3 with lucid explanations, I think we can all agree that any lingering questions regarding his capabilities will have been answered." Mr. Finch shifted in his chair, his jaw tight. "And if he fails?" "Then your institution's judgment will be affirmed," Dr. Thorne replied, his tone even. "Let us begin." He slid the first envelope toward Liam. It contained a problem on special relativity, centered on time dilation and length contraction in a non-inertial reference frame. It was a classic but notoriously tricky problem that often ensnared students who relied on plugging numbers into formulas without truly understanding the concepts. Liam opened the envelope, read the problem twice, and the solution pathway unfolded in his mind like a star chart. He began to write. His pen moved across the page not with frantic speed, but with a deliberate, confident rhythm. To solve this, we must first use the Lorentz transformations to account for the particle's acceleration, he wrote, his handwriting clear and precise. This will allow us to calculate the proper time experienced by the particle, which will differ from the time observed in the lab frame. Mr. Finch leaned forward, scrutinizing every line, every symbol, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. This wasn't the fumbling of a cheater caught without his notes. This was the methodical work of a mind that was completely at home in a four-dimensional universe. 20 minutes later, Liam had filled 2 pages with flawless calculations and crystalline explanations. He pushed the papers aside and reached for the second envelope. Inside was a problem on quantum electrodynamics, QED, involving the calculation of a Feynman diagram for electron-positron annihilation. It was a problem that required a level of mathematical abstraction that was, for most high school students, simply unthinkable. The key here is to calculate the scattering amplitude, or S-matrix element, for the process, he wrote. We will represent the incoming and outgoing particles with their respective spinors and the virtual photon with its propagator. The equations he began to write were a dense, beautiful tapestry of Greek letters and integrals, the language of the subatomic world. Dr. Thorne watched, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He glanced at Headmistress Wallace and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He had seen all he needed to see. But the third problem was not for him. The third problem was for Mr. Finch. The final envelope held what Dr. Thorne later described to a colleague as the Inquisitor's Gambit. It was a problem in matrix mechanics, a formulation of quantum theory that required a deep understanding of linear algebra, eigenvectors, and eigenvalues to solve for the energy states of a given quantum system. Liam opened it, and, for the first time, he paused. A flicker of something, uncertainty, perhaps, crossed his face. Mr. Finch leaned forward so sharply his chair creaked. This was it. The breaking point. The moment the facade would crack and the fraud would be exposed. But Liam's pause was not one of confusion. It was a moment of profound recognition. The problem was an elegant variation of a proof he had worked through just a month prior. A proof demonstrating the Heisenberg uncertainty principle using operator mechanics. He wasn't stumped, he was admiring the problem's construction. Then he began to write. This is a classic eigenvalue problem, he explained on the paper. We must first represent the Hamiltonian of the system as a matrix. The eigenvalues of this Hamiltonian matrix will correspond to the quantized energy levels of the system, and the eigenvectors will represent the corresponding energy states. Mr. Finch's face went ashen. He recognized the terms, but only vaguely, like a tourist hearing a language he'd once studied in a book. These were concepts he himself had not actively worked with since his own graduate school days, decades ago. He was watching a 17-year-old boy navigate a mathematical landscape where he himself would now be hopelessly lost. Liam worked with a relentless, quiet focus, his pen a blur of motion. He wasn't just solving a problem. He was demonstrating a fundamental mastery of the universe's operating system. When he finally set his pen down, exactly 82 minutes had passed. 3 problems. 3 complete, elegant, and utterly correct solutions. Dr. Thorne rose from his chair and collected the pages, laying them out on the table for all to see. He reviewed the work, his expression that of a master artisan examining a flawless diamond. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic beating of Liam's own heart. Finally, Dr. Thorne looked up. Dr. Thorne. The solutions, he announced, his voice resonating with finality. are not merely correct. They are exceptional. The methodology is insightful, the logic is impeccable, and the explanations demonstrate a level of conceptual understanding that would place him in the top 5% of incoming graduate students at Caltech. He turned his gaze upon Mr. Finch. Mr. Finch, do you have any remaining questions about the authenticity of this young man's abilities? Mr. Finch stared at the pages, at the undeniable, irrefutable evidence of a mind far superior to his own. The entire foundation of his worldview, his belief in the neat, orderly hierarchy of intellect and breeding, had just been demolished. He started, but the words died in his throat. Headmistress Wallace stepped into the void. Dr. Thorne, in your expert opinion, is there any possibility, however remote, that a student could achieve this result through any form of academic dishonesty? Absolutely not, Doctor, Thorne stated, his voice ringing with conviction. To fake this would be tantamount to faking the ability to compose a symphony. It requires a fluency that cannot be memorized. There was no opportunity for assistance, and the problems were designed to be immune to rote learning. He looked directly at Mr. Finch, his eyes cold. What we have witnessed here today is not a cheater. We have witnessed a prodigy that this institution was prepared to summarily execute. The air in the room crackled with tension. Everyone present understood that this was no longer about a physics problem. A verdict had been reached, and a sentence was about to be handed down. Dr. Thorne gathered Liam's solutions and squared them into a neat pile on the table. His movements were slow, deliberate, each one amplifying the gravity of the moment. When he spoke, it was not as a guest, but as a judge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. "What we have just seen is a demonstration of intellectual horsepower that I encounter on average once every 5 years. This young man possesses a mind that can naturally intuit the fundamental laws of the universe. It is a gift of staggering rarity." He held up the first solution, the relativity problem. Any bright student can learn to use the Lorentz equations, but Liam's solution shows he understands why they work. He sees the geometry of space-time. That is not knowledge. That is insight. Headmistress Wallace, ever the pragmatist, sought to contextualize the event. "Dr. Thorne, for the benefit of those of us who are not physicists, can you provide an analogy?" "Certainly," Dr. Thorne replied, turning to the whiteboard. "Imagine you have a student who has never had a formal music lesson, and you ask them, under pressure, to not only play a complex Beethoven sonata perfectly, but to also write a 5-page analysis of its harmonic structure that would be worthy of publication in a musicology journal. That is the scale of what Mr. O'Connell has just accomplished." Mr. Finch, his face a blotchy red, finally found his voice, though it was weak and strained. "But his records, his background, it doesn't align." "His background is precisely what makes this so extraordinary." Dr. Thorne's voice suddenly grew sharp, cutting through Mr. Finch's feeble protest. "Do you have any idea of the ferocious dedication, the sheer force of will required for a boy with no resources, no guidance, and no support to teach himself this level of physics? I have reviewed thousands of student profiles in my career. I can differentiate between cultivated talent and raw, unbridled genius. What you are seeing here is the latter." He held up the second solution, the QED problem. This requires a level of mathematical abstraction that we struggle to teach to our own PhD students. He didn't just solve it. He explained the underlying principles with a clarity that borders on profound. Assistant Headmaster Peterson, who had been a silent observer, finally spoke. "Dr. Thorne, what in your estimation is the likelihood that a student could present this level of work fraudulently?" "0, Dr. Thorne said flatly. "There is a 0% chance. You can no more fake an understanding of quantum field theory than you can fake the ability to breathe underwater. The internal consistency required is absolute. Either you get it or you don't. Liam gets it. Dr. Thorne then turned to face Mr. Finch, his expression one of cold, academic fury. Which brings us to the real question. How does a teacher with nearly 30 years of experience mistake a generational talent for a common cheat? The question was an indictment, and it hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Mr. Finch had no answer that would not utterly condemn him. Furthermore, Dr. Thorne pressed on, his gaze sweeping to include the headmistress, we must consider what almost happened here today. Had I not, by sheer chance, been present, Northwood Preparatory Academy would have expelled, and in doing so, likely destroyed the future of one of the most promising scientific minds of his generation. The institutional malpractice at play here is staggering. Headmistress Wallace visibly stiffened. This was no longer about one student and one teacher. It was an attack on her school, her administration. Dr. Thorne, she began cautiously, what course of action would you advise? First, he said, an immediate and unconditional reinstatement for Liam, accompanied by a formal written apology from Mr. Finch and from this administration. Second, a complete overhaul of his academic schedule. This young man should not be in a high school physics class. He should be taking graduate-level courses at the local university, with this school footing the bill. And third, he paused, letting the weight of his final point settle. A deep and uncomfortable examination of the institutional biases that allowed this to happen in the first place. Mr. Finch finally broke. I was following protocol. I had a reasonable suspicion. No, Mr. Finch, Dr. Thorne cut him off, his voice like a razor. You had a prejudice. You had a preconceived narrative about a scholarship student from the wrong part of town, and you twisted every piece of evidence to fit it. The difference between upholding standards and enforcing a caste system is the difference between education and indoctrination. He walked over to Liam, who was still sitting at the table, trying to process the tectonic shift that had just occurred in his life. This young man, with nothing but a library card and a cheap laptop, achieved a level of scholarship that most of your tuition-paying students will never dream of. And for that, he was almost crucified. Dr. Thorne's voice softened slightly as he looked at Liam, but then hardened again as he faced the administrators. Liam O'Connell represents the exact kind of brilliant, self-motivated, hungry mind that every top university in the world is fighting to find. Caltech would be honored to consider him for our early entrance program, with a full scholarship, of course. The words detonated in the room. A full scholarship to Caltech, the Holy Grail, the impossible dream, which just an hour ago had been a nightmare of suspension and disgrace, was now a tangible reality. Headmistress Wallace looked at the irrefutable evidence on the table, at the towering authority of the physicist before her, and at the quiet, vindicated boy who held the power to either save or destroy her school's reputation. Mr. Finch, she said, her voice barely a whisper, I believe an apology is in order. For the first time in his long, storied career, Alistair Finch was utterly defeated. His silence was his confession, a testament to the toxic assumptions that had nearly cost a young man everything. And in that moment, Dr. Thorne made one final statement, a proposal that would change not just Liam's life, but the very DNA of Northwood Academy forever. The apology, when Mr. Finch finally choked it out, was a pathetic, mangled thing. I misjudged your academic capabilities, Liam, he mumbled, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It was the hollow sound of a man's entire professional identity collapsing in on itself. But Liam was barely listening. He was locked onto what Dr. Thorne was saying, words that were bending the arc of his life in real time. Headmistress Wallace, Dr. Thorne continued, pressing his advantage, my offer to mentor Liam for Caltech's early admission program stands. But that only solves the problem for one student. The real issue is your system. How many other Liams are you failing to see? Headmistress Wallace bristled slightly. "What are you proposing, Dr. Thorne?" "A revolution," he stated simply. "I am proposing that Northwood pioneer a new system of talent identification. Blind, anonymous aptitude assessments for every student seeking placement in advanced courses. Evaluation based on pure, unadulterated ability, stripped of names, grades, or teacher recommendations." He pointed to Liam's file on the table. "This young man's official record showed a B student. Your traditional metrics told you he was average. But his anonymous work online revealed a mind that was off the charts. You have genius hiding in plain sight, and your system is blind to it." The idea was radical, a direct assault on the school's entrenched subjective methods of evaluation. But faced with the undeniable evidence of their failure and the implicit threat of a scandal, the administration had no choice. The Liam O'Connell affair, as it came to be known, became a catalyst for seismic change. Within a month, Northwood implemented the Thorne Protocol. All students were given the option to take a standardized, anonymous assessment for STEM placement. The results were a bombshell. A dozen students from standard-level classes, kids who had been written off as average, demonstrated an aptitude for advanced mathematics and physics that was simply astonishing. A young woman who was nearly failing English because of a language barrier was found to possess a world-class grasp of abstract algebra. A quiet, unassuming boy everyone thought was a slacker was identified as a programming prodigy. The protocol exposed a deeply rooted, systemic bias that had been operating for decades. It turned out that students with foreign-sounding names, students from less affluent feeder schools, and students who were simply quiet and non-confrontational had been consistently and systematically underestimated. Mr. Finch, along with the entire science and math faculty, was mandated to attend a series of intensive workshops on cognitive bias in education. It was a painful, ego-bruising process, but it slowly began to dismantle the prejudices that had become ingrained in the school's culture. Mr. Finch, humbled and changed, eventually became one of the protocol's most ardent supporters, haunted by the ghost of all the students he might have failed over his long career. Liam's story became a legend, a case study whispered about at educational conferences nationwide. Dr. Thorne used it as a powerful tool, a narrative to force other elite institutions to confront their own blind spots. The ripple effect was enormous. Other schools began adopting similar blind assessment policies. Scholarship programs began re-evaluating their criteria, looking for raw potential instead of just polished resumes. 2 years later, Liam O'Connell, now a rising star at Caltech, stood at a podium addressing a new class of incoming freshmen. His mother sat in the front row, tears of overwhelming pride streaming down her face. But Liam's true victory wasn't the acceptance letter, the scholarship, or even the groundbreaking research he was already conducting. His victory was the knowledge that back at Northwood, and in dozens of schools like it, a new system was in place. A system that would open doors for countless other kids who, like him, carried their brilliance in secret. The machine that was built to crush him had been forced to rebuild itself. 4 years later, Liam Williams stood before the International Congress of Physics, presenting his doctoral thesis on quantum entanglement, a theory that would fundamentally change our understanding of the universe. The quiet confidence that saw him through that hellish afternoon in Mr. Finch's classroom now held thousands of the world's greatest minds in rapt attention. But if you think this story is about Liam's incredible success, you've missed the entire point. This story is about a question that should terrify every single one of us. How much genius are we letting die on the vine? How many brilliant minds are we suffocating simply because they don't look or sound the way we expect them to? Right now, in a classroom somewhere, in a cubicle, in a workshop, there is someone with a gift that could change the world. But their potential is invisible. It's hidden behind a quiet demeanor, a thick accent, a worn-out pair of shoes, or a zip code from the wrong side of the tracks. Their brilliance is being dismissed as daydreaming. Their insight is being ignored as insolence. Their passion is being crushed by a system that rewards conformity and pedigree over raw, messy, inconvenient talent. Mr. Finch, to his credit, spent the rest of his career as a crusader for educational reform. He would often tell his new students that his single greatest professional failure wasn't that he almost destroyed one boy's future. It was the terrifying, unknowable number of students he had already failed over the previous 28 years. How many sparks did he extinguish with a casual, biased assumption? The Thorne Protocol, which started at Northwood, has since identified over 500 students across the state whose abilities were being tragically underestimated. 500 futures rewritten. 500 minds that were almost lost to a system that was designed to see what it wanted to see. But here's the cold, hard truth that should keep you up at night. Liam was lucky. He was one in a million. He was lucky Dr. Thorne happened to be there on that specific day. He was lucky his genius was in a field as objective as physics, where the truth of an equation cannot be denied. But what about the brilliant poets, the visionary artists, the natural leaders, the empathetic healers whose gifts can't be proven on a whiteboard? How many of them are dismissed, discouraged, and ultimately broken by people who refuse to see past their own narrow biases? This isn't just about schools. It's about the company that hires the charismatic talker over the quiet doer. It's about the project that gets assigned to the safe bet instead of the brilliant innovator. It's about every single time we value the packaging more than the contents. Every time we choose the comfort of our own assumptions over the difficult, world-changing work of seeing what is truly there. The physics that saved Liam's life was pure and undeniable. But most human potential is not. It exists in the gray areas, where prejudice can disguise itself as experience, and bias can masquerade as good judgment. So I'm asking you to do something. Look around your life, at your job, in your community, in your own family. Who are you not seeing? Whose light are you dimming because it doesn't shine in a way you recognize? Whose potential are you ignoring because it's wrapped in a package you weren't expecting? Liam's story is proof that greatness can come from anywhere. But it requires us to have the courage to look for it, the courage to be wrong, the courage to tear down systems that serve the privileged and build new ones that serve the brilliant, no matter where they are found. Dr. Thorne didn't save Liam with charity. He saved him with recognition. He demanded evidence over assumption. He chose truth over comfort. And that is a power we all have. The power to see people clearly. The power to demand better of our institutions. The power to be the one who finally sees the fire in someone else's eyes. Because right now, another Liam is out there, holding a universe of potential in their quiet hands, just waiting for one person to have the courage to look past the surface and truly see them. The only question is, will that person be you? If this story resonated with you, subscribe to our channel for more tales that challenge the status quo. Hit that like button and share your own story in the comments below, because every brilliant mind deserves the chance to be seen.